Let's get started with our next keynote. So right now, I can formally welcome you, Idan. Thank you,
Yaniv.
Yaniv. Thank you very much for joining the event. So we are very excited about your presentation covering the topic of how to implement the right web security in cloud native environments. So right now, I'm handing over the floor to you. I'm going to be muting, and I'm going to be waiting for your presentation. Perfect. This is perfect.
Let me just unmute myself. Okay. So, hello everyone. It's happy to be here. My name is Yaniv Keynote. I'm the VP product for Reblaze. Been working with Reblaze for the past 6 years. A little bit about me. So before I started working with Reblaze, I was working in the IT and security for almost 15 years, mainly dealing with web security and dealing with IT infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and then virtual infrastructure, and then moving to the cloud. When I met Reblaze, actually, I was a customer. And that is an interesting point because I really like the product. I chose it because of a need I had with my former company. And since then, I've been, using and being a user actually of Reblaze over the years. When we talk about native cloud environment, we all think about just virtual instances or virtual stack of instances, and we sometimes have a nature need for security. When we have a web application, we need always to keep in mind that there are lots of threats aiming towards web applications, aiming towards APIs, and we need to think of a solution that would be having both simplicity and security on all sides, but yet it needs to be deployed and maintained easily and fluid with our deployment. A little bit about Reblaze. So Reblaze founded in 2012, and we have hundreds of enterprise level customers. We're dealing with thousands of web applications. We have lots of traffic, and of course, we're dealing with it, I hope, and I know that we're dealing it on the right side, and we are able to mitigate attacks and provide security to all those assets. Now, when we have a large scale of deployment and a large scale of operations, you need to have some way to control all of that. When you deploy it on the cloud, you have some capabilities that you can leverage from the cloud and integrate it within your security. So when dealing with security, for instance, if you look at the security aspects, so you have content delivery on one end, you have availability on the other hand, and then you have security on the other hand. All of those aspects are covered by Reblaze, but when you deploy that on your environment, sometimes when you come to design this this type of solution, you might need to take few different solutions and mix them together in some way that they can operate and hopefully provide some level of security for your application. While with Reblaze, the approach that we have for native cloud security is that we deployed within the same cloud environment as our customers. If your application is deployed on AWS or in Google or Azure or any other major cloud provider, we will deploy our solution on the same cloud provider, hopefully the same region, as close as possible to the application. The reason for that are actually two reasons. The main reason is that when you have the deployment set on the same region or the same environment, the risk of latency drops down to zero. The other benefit that you can get from that is that your traffic is not leaving the cloud environment. It's not routing out from one cloud to another cloud or to another third-party CDN and then routed back. It's all remain on the same cloud provider. We have two main types actually of deployment. One is a SaaS solution where Reblaze is deployed, as I mentioned, on the same on the same cloud provider as your application. The other deployment would be to deploy it within your own VPC. We have few types of license model that you can use, but basically we can be deployed from the marketplace or by providing a custom or dedicated image within your own VPC. That gives us the third, I would say, benefit when it comes to looking at securing the deployment is that the traffic not only leaving the cloud provider, it doesn't even leave your virtual network. It stays within your network. The traffic is internal from the Reblaze instances to your application. Your application is not exposed. You do not need to have an external interface. This would be dealing with at Reblaze side as well. I mentioned that we leverage whatever the capabilities that the cloud provider can provide us. One of those capabilities are the fact that all of the major cloud providers provide some sort of load balancing. They all provide some sort of CDN solution, and they provide for us what we call, or what we like to look at, is the scaling capabilities. We know that all those cloud providers, they have the best network. They have almost unlimited capacity when it comes to scaling and dealing with network and compute resources. And we know that when we deployed everything together, it smoothly runs, and we can mitigate and of course provide service to any scale of applications. Not only bad traffic, malicious traffic, but of course for the legitimate traffic as well. When it comes to the security itself, a little bit about the profiling or the way Reblaze deal with the security. So when a traffic flows, Reblaze, unlike other solutions, and yes, you may say that all those cloud providers can provide some kind of security, but I would say that in a nutshell, Reblaze is much more superior when it comes to security, because we have bot mitigation, bot management in place. We have layer 7 policies and layer 7 routing and security in place. We have, I would say, sort of advanced rate limiting that we can rate limit anything that comes within the request. And we have a much more advanced ACL capabilities when it comes to filtering the content and filtering the clients. But the first thing that Reblaze does is profiling the traffic. We rely heavily on profiling and analyzing the client before we even analyze the payload. For instance, a request comes in, we determine whether or not this client is coming from the Tor network. Is it coming from a VPN provider, an anonymous proxy? Have this client already created any violation in the past? So anything that we detect prior to analyzing the payload gives us some understanding of the risk of those clients, and then we are able to adjust the security in order to mitigate any malicious traffic that tries to pass in. We rely on machine learning. We rely on those traffic analysis that we are doing, but mainly we have the bot management, we have the behavioral analysis that we are doing, and everything, all those types of layers, they are all singing together with a beautiful harmony, I would say, and then would mitigate whatever is not legitimate traffic or of any sort of illegitimacy. I mentioned that the profiling is something that we do on the way, but we have multiple layers of security when it comes to understanding the traffic and verifying whether or not the traffic is legitimate or not. Any request that passes in, whether or not if it's coming from a bot or it's coming from browser, need to pass through certain layers of security. I mentioned the profiling that we do. We determine whether or not this client is coming from black nets or some other places. We determine whether or not this request should pass through the primary filtering. If the request, for example, try to make a non-legitimate method across this URL that perhaps is a request to make a post request, and then this request is a get request or a header request. And then we have some dynamic filtering, which look at the behavioral and look at the counting. And of course, we have the biometric, where we determine whether or not this request is a bot, whether or not the behavioral of this client is legit or not. And then, of course, we determine whether or not we should forward the request over to the origin or mitigate this request on the spot. Another aspect that I mentioned is the deployment and managing your deployment and making sure that everything flows fluidly together with your infrastructure. So when you deploy Reblaze, not as a SaaS solution, but within your own VPC, you have the ability to deploy it and make the deployment as part of your ongoing DevSecOps solution. So you can call that from your Terraform, from your Git, and make the circle of the deployment as part of your solution. When it comes to upgrading and, of course, scaling out, scaling in, open up new regions, everything is smoothly. You can look at it as security as a code when it comes to deploying Reblaze. The benefits that I mentioned, part of it actually is that we have machine intelligence analyzing the traffic. We rely on machine learning, biometric, recognizing new threats, and of course, also mitigating that. We need to understand that Reblaze is a single tenant solution. you have a single tenant that can be deployed on multiple regions and also on a hybrid solution, meaning it could be deployed on multiple vendors as well. So you can have a high availability when it comes to availability within the region between multi-zone. You can have availability between regions, and you can also have high availability between cloud providers. We have some customers that require to be always up, and they are heavily dependent on those features. So they deployed across multiple vendors, and they are never down. They are always up with their application, and wherever they deploy their application, they deployed Reblaze, and they route traffic, of course, to those regions that are up. If a region, of course, is failing, they would take the traffic away from that region. So I think when it comes to compliance, Reblaze provides all compliance certificates. We are partnered with the cloud providers. Whatever certificates the cloud providers provide for their infrastructure, of course, you are covered, but you are also covered when it comes to major compliance certificates such as ISO, PCI, GDPR, and so on. Just to mention some of our customers, some of the, I would say, known customers, but the thing to look at is that we have customers from all verticals. When you have an application, a web application running on a public face, you might need protection, and we can be there to help you out with the protection. If your organization is big, such as eBay, or small, such as other vendors over here, it doesn't really matter for us. Security is the same across all the applications. What we want to do now, before we jump to the demo, maybe if there are some questions, we can take, I would say, a few minutes to answer some questions, and then we'll jump into a live demo.
It seems that we don't have questions at the moment, so I propose you to go into the demo.
Very well. Okay, so let me just, okay. So basically what we see here, this is Reblaze dashboard. As I mentioned, it's a single tenant. For each customer, we deployed a dedicated environment. So it's not like other vendors that are using a shared environment or shared resources. With Reblaze, each customer has their own set of stack servers and stack environment. Whether if you are deployed within your own VPC, for sure you have your own dedicated environment, but also as a SaaS deployment, each customer has their own set of servers. It gives us, I would say, two major things. One, it gives us the ability to maintain and focus the security for each customer individually. Second, no noisy neighbors are influencing each other customers. So each customers have their own deployment, have their own load balancer, have their own data set. There's no mixing between them. And of course, the security is much higher that way. What we see over here is actually the traffic. So Reblaze provide full visibility as part of the features. But before we jump to the visibility, I want to show you the raw logs. So with Reblaze, we log every request that passes in. This is a major thing with Reblaze, is that We log every request that passed in, whether or not this request was a successful request, whether it was mitigated, whether it was engaged with a bot mitigation, but we log all requests and we log all the information regarding this request. So for example, if I'm clicking on any of those requests, I can see some information regarding the request. I can also see additional information if I click the magnifying glass, like the size of the request, the response, if there was any. In this case, there was nothing, but also I can see headers, I can see cookies, I can see the origin, and I can see how long it took the origin to respond back to Reblaze. In addition to that, I can also see the overall latency for each request that was added by the WAF. And maybe it's something that worth mentioning, that WAF is a CPU consuming application because it analyzes the payload. When I say that there is latency, the average latency for Reblaze WAF is approximately 9 nanoseconds. So it's not it's not such a big number, but I mean, this is the average. If you have a very large request, it could be much more than that. When it comes to the request, and I wanted to show you that all the requests are logs, you can see in a much visual way all your requests. So you can see how many requests will be made, how many requests will be in response with the bot mitigation. We call that a challenge in Reblaze. You can also see response codes, you can see bandwidth, you can see statistics based on your application. This is a demo environment, but I'm going to show you a live example of requests. When it comes to the security, for each application, you can set different type of security settings based on the need or based on the organization policy. For example, let me take this for example. We can say that for /API, we would like to have a rate limit that mitigate this by cookie or by IP or something like that. We can also say that for certain URLs, we would like to run some code. So Reblaze provide the ability to run what we call cloud function, which is a piece of code that you can run on certain phase of the request. So when you think of it, it might be seen on the market as edge compute, but basically it's a piece of code that you run on certain phase of the request before analyzing the traffic, after analyzing, before the response or after the response. And this piece of code can help you out with providing some logical aspect to the security, or to the security itself. You can analyze things. For example, you can decode base 64, you can response back, you can do lots of stuff with that. I will show that in a minute. As for the other aspects, there are lots of settings that you can do. Let's not go into those settings. I just want to show you when it comes to mitigating the attack, what are the steps that we're doing. So we talked about profiling as part of the security layers that Reblaze is doing. So part of those profiling are predefined, for example, the Tor network, VPN providers, and all those. But you have the ability to create your own profile sessions, as it calls. So if I create in a new list, I'm going to call it Yaniv test. And then I'm going to give it some tags. Let's say it's Yaniv test. I can add to this list whatever I want to match within the request. So for example, if I want to match a certain IP, or if I want to match a certain path, something in the query string, maybe something in the method or headers or cookies or whatever comes into within the request. Let's go ahead and look for a header. the header name would be Yaniv, and then the value would be something like Yaniv, and then I would call it Yaniv's header. Okay, and now I have it over here. So any request that comes with this header containing that value would be tagged with this tag. So you might say, okay, this is just a tag, but what can you do with this tag? So I can refer to this tag within the policy. So currently this tag is, no, it doesn't make any sense, but within, for example, rate limits, I can say that I can create a rate limit that would rate limit only traffic that contain this tag. So for example, you're saying that anyone that matches a certain user agent, let's say some bot that is a good bot, but generate too many requests and you want to slow it down, you can match that and then create a dedicated rate limit for that IP. With a rate limit, you can create rate limit, as I mentioned, based on anything literally that comes along in the request. So I'm going to call it just rate limit test. And let's say the description is test. And then the rate limit would look at the limit number and then a time frame. Let's say it's 60 seconds. And then I can compose a key composition that would describe whatever I want to rate. So for example, I can rate a header value. So the header name could be the header that I mentioned, right? And then any distinct value would be counted into this rate limit. I can go ahead and compose a more complex rate limit. So I can say, okay, I want to look at the header, and then I want to look at a certain cookie. Let's say it's a PHP session ID. And then I want to add an attribute of remote address. Okay, so now my key composition is a little bit more complex. You need to match all of those together in order to get counted by this rate limit. But remember, we did a tag, and I want to include only requests that containing those tags. That's why I have the include and exclude over here, and I can tell it to look at the attribute called tag, and then place my Yaniv test tag over here. So now the rate limit would only operate whenever the tag is available. It would not run across all the other requests. Now, rate limit are just rate limit, but we can be more complex when it comes to rate limit. So rate limit by itself, as I mentioned, they do one thing, right? They limit the amount of requests that contain a certain key composition within a time frame. But with Reblaze, you have an additional thing called pairing. What pairing is doing, it gives you the ability to set a limit of the number of distinct pair attribute with your key composition. Meaning, if we're looking at this example, we have a key composition of a cookie PHP session ID, and then we have pair it with remote address. It means that for that time frame, which is 10 minutes, only 3 distinct remote IP address can come with the same PHP session ID. If you think of it, you log in or you're going to a website on your mobile from home, you're on the home Wi-Fi, and then you go out to your car and you have the 4G or 5G IP. So that's another IP. And then you get to the office, you connect to the office Wi-Fi, and then that's the third IP. Of course, within 10 minutes, that makes sense. But if that is for, I don't know, 1 day, this doesn't make sense. It's too rapid, right? So you can control how many distinct IP. If you think of it and you want to be more strict and you do something like that, then you're saying, okay, this IP and this session cookie are bound together. no session hijacking can come between them, right? Once they appear, they are bind together. They cannot be separated for this amount of time. Of course, you can be more creative than this example that I did, but you can get the idea. The other thing regarding tag is that within the ACLs, you can also refer to those tags. So you can refer to them in rate limit and you can refer to them in the ACLs. With the ACLs, I mentioned that we do some internal tagging like anonymous proxies, VPN providers, Tor network, and so on. But you can also refer to your own tags. So if I'm creating a tag, I can set a deny to Yaniv test tag. And if this tag is available, it will be denied. You can also match the IPs, CDAL, and also something that we call custom signatures. Custom signatures gives you the ability to drill down within the request and create, compose your own signatures. I want to show you now a little bit about what an attack would look like when it comes to Reblaze. So we talked about scale and we talked about deployment. So let's say you're not happy with Reblaze, you're happy with your own firewall, that web application firewall that you got, but it's not scaling out. It's a single tenant, single instance that you get. Maybe you don't have a license to scale it up. Maybe your license is limited, or maybe the device is just a simple device that doesn't allow scaling. But with Reblaze, if you remember, the deployment is done in a way that will leverage whatever the capabilities that the cloud provider can provide. So if the cloud provider provide scaling capabilities, we'll be able to scale. I want to show you now, let me just fire it up. Where is it? Right. Okay, so I have a website over here that I set up that is called test. If I'm hitting this website, I should be getting just a simple echo response of my request. As you can see, I can see headers, I can see whatever cookies were requested from those requests. But if I look at the Reblaze dashboard and I want to analyze my traffic for this type of application, what I need to do is I simply need to filter. So Reblaze provides a very intuitive language of filtering, and I can filter the requests and look only for requests that containing this host that I was referring to, right? The logs, I didn't mention that, but the logs are almost real time. So they are coming in as they come. When you refresh the page, there's a short delay, of course, from the time the requests are done until you see it over in the log, but it's almost real time. Let's see if we have some requests coming in on this. Okay, requests are starting to come in. And then we want to filter out the log and just analyze our site. So currently it's just started. It's taking time to pile up. By the way, if you're interested, the attack I'm sort of doing is something that we build internally. It's not something external, but don't try that at home. Okay, let's see if we have enough data. Okay, so we see some requests coming in. Some of the requests are legitimate requests. Some of them are being mitigated. And when it comes to understanding what's going on your application, Reblaze provide a very simple tool to analyze the traffic. I mentioned that you have the raw logs, but raw logs are a tedious work when it comes to analyzing the traffic. You have the dashboard that gives you very easy access to the statistics. For example, where the requests are coming from. Currently, all of them are coming from Germany. The sources that generate those requests, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 instances from Amazon that we're seeing the request from. Regarding session, this is irrelevant for now, but we see the requests actually over here. And we can see some signatures. So we have few signatures that are called autoban. And when we're looking at the referrer or the user agent, we can see that all of them are actually called Reblaze browser 2, 3, 4, 5. If we refresh the page, I assume we're going to have some more info. As I mentioned, some of the logs are coming in a short delay. So you see over here, you can see that the scale start piling up. We can scale actually even more. Let me just increase it a little bit. All right, so we'll have 20 instances hitting us. And then we see the requests are piling up, but we also see that there are lots of block events starting to pile up as well. So again, if we analyze only the requests that are coming for this application, we can see that at the beginning, there were some few requests that made it in, but after a few short time, requests are starting to get blocked, and we want to know why they got blocked. So we have down here a little bit explanation saying that, okay, those are 503. They made an overcapacity request. They made too many requests for a certain amount of time, but maybe the response was also from the origin. Maybe our origin started, to get linked. What we can see is we can see the behavior of those IPs, those clients. We have in Reblaze, we have something that we are called dynamic rules. These are a set of rules that are looking at the historical behavior of requests of clients, and then determine whether or not they should be added to a ban list and be banned for a longer period of time. In this case, it's a 1 hour ban. For instance, if we're looking at this rule over here, the target would be an IP. Again, the target could be anything that comes along in the request. We can mitigate by cookie, by S number, by request body, by the header, and so on. In this case, it's just IP. And we're counting more than 30 events within 3 minutes from the same IP, where the response was a block response.
Yaniv,
So, yes.
We have a few questions from the audience. I think it's important to address them.
Yes, please.
So let's go through them one by one. So we have a question here from the audience. So if we have a domain on Bluehost and wanted to integrate this into my site for protection on endpoints, would it be possible, or do I have to get a hosting from VPS services like Google Cloud or DigitalOcean?
Okay, that's a good question. As I mentioned, there are 2 types of deployment that you can do. One deployment is deploying within your own infrastructure, meaning within your own VPC if you're running on the cloud provider. But if you're not running on a cloud provider, Reblaze can provide for you as a SaaS solution the deployment. So routing the traffic is a matter of DNS change. We will be facing the external IP, of course, the request. We will analyze the traffic, and only clean traffic would be routed over to the origin.
We have another question. I think this is more commercial, that I probably advise you to answer this at the booth. The question is, do you offer discounted packages for security professionals wanting to use your software to protect small business owners, like 20% discount for exclusive contract? I think that's better to, I advise, our attendee to just visit you at the booth after this presentation, you can discuss that more in detail. Make sense?
Yes, so when it comes to license models, we have few license models, some for, if you have a small business, we have some model for small business. I mentioned that we have lots of enterprise level companies as well. As you've seen or you could understand, the solution is very simple, but yet it could be very complex when it comes to adjustments and settings. So you can fine tune the solution and tailor it to your application the best that you can get, as best as you can get. I mean, so yes, we can provide solutions for small companies, but on the other end, of course, we can provide for larger organization, as I mentioned, complex deployment and complex application as well. Yeah, I think we can address all sides of business.
Finally, another question is, how do you recognize a client in terms of remember and correlate with a previous suspicious request?
Okay, so I mentioned the logs, that we log all the requests that are coming in. And the log retention, by the way, the default retention is 90 days. With the dynamic rules, you can create rules that are based on minutes and up. But for example, I can look also at hours, right? So if an IP generates violations for a longer period of time, we can catch that and of course address that. And as I mentioned, the target, it doesn't need to be just IP. It could be a header, it could be a cookie. Also with the rate limit, which is more real-time blocker and counter, you can also do the same thing as the dynamic rule, more or less, but the blocking and the mitigation, unlike the dynamic rule, would not be a banning across all applications and all URLs. The banning would be as an action ban. Of course, you put a time period for the ban, but the banning would be only for those requests that matches the criteria, matching the key composition, matching the includes, matching the exclude, of course, and so on.
So thank you very much. This covers about everything. Thank you for this great presentation, great stuff. I hope it's very clear now for the audience. Again, I encourage our attendees to just pay a visit to your booth and continue the discussions. Thank you, Yaniv. Take care.
Very well. Thank you very much for hosting us.
My pleasure. Toda raba.